Get off this property before I call the cops, because broke strangers don't walk through private gates and invent ownership.
You can call whoever you want, but I'm not walking away from land my family has kept for generations.
Your family? Don't stand there and embarrass yourself. People like you don't own places like this.
You keep saying that like your opinion has the power to erase what this place really is.
She stepped closer, raising her phone while neighbors watched from their porches.
When the officers get here, they'll remove you and remind everyone who actually belongs here.
Malcolm didn't move as the patrol cars rolled toward the gate. Vanessa had no idea this was the moment her perfect life started coming apart. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. Malcolm Reddick pushed through the wrought iron gate, its familiar creak echoing across the morning air. The sound brought back childhood memories of racing through this same entrance after school. Now, at 62, he carried a manila folder thick with documents, a measuring tape clipped to his belt, and his phone ready to capture evidence. The estate stretched before him like a piece of forgotten history. Towering oak trees cast long shadows across the property his great-grandfather had purchased in 1908. Malcolm's boots crunched against the gravel driveway as he approached the first fence post, its weathered wood bearing decades of Carolina storms. He knelt beside the old marker, running his fingers along the carved initials J.R. 1952, his grandfather's work. The measuring tape unrolled with a metallic snap, as Malcolm documented the exact distance between property lines. Each measurement went into his notebook with military precision. The survey stone sat half-buried under years of fallen leaves. Malcolm brushed away the debris, revealing the faded numbers etched into concrete. His phone camera clicked repeatedly, capturing angles and close-ups. Every photo was potential evidence in the fight ahead. "Excuse me!" The voice cracked across the property like a whip. Malcolm looked up to see a woman storming across the road. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour. Diamond earrings caught the sunlight as she marched toward him in designer shoes that clicked against the asphalt. Vanessa Whitcomb's face was twisted with fury. Her manicured finger pointed at Malcolm like a weapon. "What are you doing on this property?" Malcolm stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. His voice remained steady. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm documenting the property lines." "You're trespassing." Vanessa's voice pitched higher. "Who sent you here? What company are you with?" "I'm not with any company." Malcolm's tone stayed calm and professional. "This is my family's land." Vanessa's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Your family's land? Don't be ridiculous. People like you don't own property in Ashford Pines. This isn't Section 8 housing." Malcolm felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with recognition. He'd heard this tone before, in a dozen different places, from a dozen different people who looked just like her. His military training kicked in. Stay calm. Document everything. Let them expose themselves. "Ma'am, I can show you the deed if you'd like." He reached toward his folder. "Don't you dare!" Vanessa stepped back dramatically. "I don't know what scam you're running, but it won't work here. This is a respectable neighborhood." Malcolm raised his phone, thumb hovering over the record button. "For both our protection, I'm going to record this conversation." "Record this?" Vanessa's eyes went wide with outrage. "You have no right. I'm calling the police right now. They need to know there's a suspicious man threatening residents." "I haven't threatened anyone." Malcolm's voice remained level as the recording began. "I'm standing on my own property, conducting a legal survey." Vanessa had already pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. Her voice transformed into a performance of terror and distress. 911? I need help immediately. There's a black man on my street threatening me. He's recording me without permission and refuses to leave when I've asked him to stop trespassing." Malcolm stood perfectly still on his family's lawn, phone steady in his hand, watching this woman perform for an emergency dispatcher while standing in the middle of a public road. The first patrol car's tires crunched against gravel as it pulled up to the curb. A second vehicle followed close behind, both cars positioning themselves with clear sightlines to the property. Malcolm kept his hands visible at his sides, the manila folder tucked under his left arm, his phone still recording in his right hand. Officer Daniel Harper stepped out of the lead car, his uniform crisp and his movements deliberate. His partner, Officer Luis Alvarez, emerged from the passenger side, both men scanning the scene with professional attention. Harper's eyes moved from Vanessa, who stood in the middle of the road gesturing wildly, to Malcolm, who remained motionless on the lawn beside the survey marker. "He won't leave!" Vanessa's voice carried across the morning air like a siren. "I told him this is private property and he's still here. Arrest him, not me." Harper raised his hand slightly, a gesture that suggested calm. "Ma'am, we need to understand what's happening here. Can you step back to the sidewalk, please?" "Step back?" Vanessa's face flushed red with indignation. "I'm the victim here. He chased me across the street. He was following me with that camera, recording me without my permission." Alvarez moved to position himself between Vanessa and Malcolm, his notebook already in hand. His dark eyes took in the measuring tape on Malcolm's belt, the survey stone visible in the grass, and the careful distance Malcolm maintained from everyone present. "Sir," Harper addressed Malcolm directly, his tone neutral but attentive, "can you tell me what brings you to this location today?" Malcolm's voice remained steady and clear. "Officer, my name is Malcolm Reddick. This property belonged to my mother, Josephine Reddick, who passed away 3 months ago. I'm here today to document the property lines as part of settling her estate." "That's a lie!" Vanessa shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger. "People like him don't own houses in Ashford Pines. He's probably casing the neighborhood." Malcolm reached slowly toward his folder. "I have documentation, officer. The deed, tax receipts, and access road records are all here." "Don't let him near those papers." Vanessa stepped forward aggressively. "He probably stole them. Check his background. I bet he has a criminal record." Harper held up his hand again. "Ma'am, please let him speak." "The deed shows continuous family ownership since 1908, Malcolm continued, his military training keeping his voice measured, despite the accusations flying around him. "My great-grandfather purchased this land, and it's been in the Reddick family ever since." "Lies! All lies!" Vanessa's performance reached a crescendo. "He's running some kind of scam, probably working with a gang of criminals who target nice neighborhoods like ours." Alvarez was taking careful notes, his pen moving across the page as he documented each statement. His attention focused on the details: Malcolm's calm demeanor, the survey equipment, the weathered property markers that clearly showed long-term maintenance. "Sir, may I see your identification and the documents you mentioned?" Harper's request was professional, not demanding. Malcolm began to reach for his wallet when Vanessa suddenly lunged forward. "Stop protecting him!" Her hand shot out, slapping Malcolm's phone from his grip. The device arced through the air before landing in the grass near the fence post, its screen still glowing. "He lunged at me!" Vanessa immediately spun toward Harper, her voice desperate and shrill. "Did you see that? He tried to attack me. That's assault. Arrest him right now." Alvarez's head snapped up from his notepad, his eyes tracking the trajectory of the fallen phone. The device lay several feet away, its red recording light still blinking steadily in the morning sun. Harper pulled his patrol tablet from its mount, the screen glowing as he accessed the county property database. His fingers moved across the interface with practiced efficiency, entering the address and cross-referencing it with Malcolm's provided documentation. "Let me verify these records," Harper said, his tone remaining professional as he compared the information on his screen to the deed Malcolm had presented. Vanessa paced behind them, her heels clicking against the asphalt like a metronome of agitation. "This is ridiculous! You're wasting time on some vagrant's fake papers while I'm standing here as the victim." Alvarez retrieved Malcolm's phone from the grass, noting its undamaged condition, and the fact that it had continued recording throughout the entire encounter. He handed it back to Malcolm with a slight nod, his observant eyes taking in how carefully Malcolm handled the device. "The records show Malcolm Reddick as the current property owner," Harper announced, scrolling through the database entries. "Inherited from Josephine Reddick, deceased March 15th of this year. The property boundaries include the house, front lawn, the gravel driveway, and—" He paused, his eyebrows raising slightly. "The private access road that runs along the eastern property line. That can't be right." Vanessa's voice pitched higher with panic. "Check again. There has to be some mistake in your system." Malcolm reached into his folder and withdrew several additional documents. "Officer Alvarez, these are copies you can keep for your report." His movements were deliberate and transparent. "The original deed, my mother's death certificate, and last month's property tax payment showing current ownership." Alvarez accepted the papers, scanning them with the thoroughness of someone who understood the importance of documentation. The tax receipt alone showed a payment of nearly $4,000, far more than someone running a scam would invest in fake documents. "I'm calling the mayor." Vanessa fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking with indignation. "Mayor Richardson will straighten this out. He'll tell you what kind of people belong in Ashford Pines." Harper looked up from his tablet, his expression shifting from neutral to concerned. "Ma'am, according to these records, the access road you use to reach your side gate crosses directly through Mr. Reddick's property. Have you had permission to use that road?" "Permission?" Vanessa's laugh carried a brittle edge of hysteria. "I don't need permission. We've been using that road for 15 years. It's practically ours by now." "That's not how property law works," Malcolm said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades investigating legal matters. "Informal use doesn't create ownership rights, especially when the property owner never granted explicit permission." "Mrs. Whitcomb," Harper continued, his tone becoming more formal, "do you have doorbell camera footage from this morning? I'd like to review what happened before we arrived." Vanessa's face went pale. "Why do you need that? I already told you everything that happened." "Standard procedure," Alvarez interjected, looking up from the documents. "Video evidence helps us understand the timeline of events." The cameras might not have been working properly today," Vanessa stammered, backing away slightly. Harper's expression remained steady, but his voice carried new weight. "The footage would help clarify who was where when this confrontation began. If you were on your own property when Mr. Reddick allegedly approached you, the cameras would show that." Malcolm stood silently, his hands at his sides, watching as the officers methodically built their understanding of the situation. Years of military investigation had taught him that truth revealed itself through patience and proper procedure. "Fine," Vanessa snapped, her composure cracking completely. "But you'll see he was stalking me, following me around like some kind of predator." Harper accessed Vanessa's doorbell camera through the neighborhood security network, his tablet displaying the morning's footage. The officers watched as the recording clearly showed Vanessa leaving her property, crossing the access road, and walking directly onto Malcolm's lawn toward where he stood measuring near the survey stone. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Harper said, his voice taking on a tone that made the morning air feel suddenly heavier. "Based on these property records and this video evidence, you are no longer the complainant in this matter. You are now part of an active investigation." Vanessa's face drained of all color. The sound of car doors and footsteps drew attention from neighboring houses. Curtains twitched. Garage doors cracked open. The residents of Ashford Pines rarely witnessed drama this public, and Vanessa's raised voice had carried far down the quiet street. Malcolm remained beside the old mailbox, one hand pressed against his shoulder where Vanessa had struck him with his own phone. The pain throbbed steadily, but he kept his expression neutral. Years of military discipline had taught him that showing weakness invited further attack. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." Vanessa spun toward the officers, her voice climbing to a shrill pitch that echoed off the manicured lawns. "I organize the charity galas. I sit on 3 different boards. When Mayor Richardson hears how you've embarrassed me, how you've humiliated me in front of my neighbors," she jabbed her finger at Harper's chest, "you'll both be walking a beat in the worst part of town." Harper stepped back, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and step away." "Calm down?" Vanessa's laugh was sharp and desperate. "You come to my neighborhood. You take the word of some vagrant over a respected member of this community, and you tell me to calm down?" More neighbors had emerged now. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down stood on her front porch, arms crossed. The Hendersons peered over their perfectly trimmed hedge. Even old Mr. Kowalski had shuffled out to his driveway, leaning heavily on his walker. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Alvarez said firmly, "you need to understand your situation. The evidence shows you left your property, approached Mr. Reddick on his property, and initiated this confrontation." "Evidence?" Vanessa whirled around, her designer blouse now wrinkled and stained with grass. "You think you're so smart with your little cameras and your paperwork." She pushed past Harper with surprising force, lunging toward Malcolm. "Give me that folder. I know there's something fake in there." Her manicured fingers clawed at the manila folder in Malcolm's hands, trying to wrench it away from him. Papers scattered as Malcolm instinctively pulled back, protecting the documents that contained his mother's legacy. "That's enough!" Alvarez moved quickly, stepping between Vanessa and Malcolm. His voice carried the authority of someone who had seen this kind of escalation before. "Mrs. Whitcomb, you have now physically struck Mr. Reddick's phone, filed a demonstrably false police report, and actively interfered with our investigation." Vanessa stumbled backward, her chest heaving. "You don't know what you're doing. This man tricked you. He's probably some kind of con artist who forged those papers." She spun toward the growing crowd of neighbors, her arms spread wide in a gesture of desperate appeal. Tell them what kind of people live in Ashford Pines. Tell them this doesn't belong here." The neighbors stood in complete silence. Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. The Hendersons exchanged glances but said nothing. Mr. Kowalski shifted on his walker, but remained quiet. Not one person stepped forward to support her. The silence stretched like a held breath. Vanessa's face cycled through emotions, confusion, disbelief, and finally, crushing realization. The community she had ruled through fear and social pressure was watching her public meltdown with the detached interest of spectators at someone else's disaster. "Mrs. Vanessa Whitcomb," Harper said, producing handcuffs from his belt, "you are under arrest for filing a false police report, assault, and obstruction of justice." "This is insane!" Vanessa screamed as the metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. "You're arresting me? I'm the victim here." Harper guided her toward the patrol car, his grip firm but professional. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Malcolm Reddick," Vanessa twisted in Harper's grasp, her voice carrying across the street. "You think you've won something? You have no idea what you've started. This neighborhood will never accept you. Never." Malcolm knelt slowly, gathering the scattered papers from his mother's folder. His hands were steady, despite the pain in his shoulder. The deed, the tax receipts, the survey maps, all the proof of his family's rightful place in this community lay spread across the grass like fallen leaves. Malcolm pushed through the front door of the Reddick house, dust motes dancing in the fading sunlight that filtered through grimy windows. The old floorboards creaked under his weight as he made his way to the kitchen table, still clutching his mother's manila folder. His shoulder throbbed where Vanessa had shoved him, but the ache felt distant compared to the surreal events of the afternoon. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number Eleanor Briggs had given him months ago. She had handled some legal questions about his mother's estate, and Malcolm trusted her judgment more than any lawyer he knew. "Eleanor Briggs," came the crisp voice after 2 rings. "Ms. Briggs, this is Malcolm Reddick. I need your help." Malcolm's voice was steady, but he could hear the exhaustion creeping in around the edges. "Malcolm, what's happened?" Malcolm explained everything. Vanessa's confrontation, the road records that proved his property line, the arrest. Eleanor listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement. The woman who filed the false report, Eleanor said finally. What was her last name? Whitcomb. Vanessa Whitcomb. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Malcolm could hear papers rustling on Eleanor's end. Malcolm, you need to understand something. The Whitcomb name isn't just some wealthy family throwing their weight around. They're connected to Whitcomb Meridian Development. Graham Whitcomb runs one of the biggest development companies in the state. Malcolm frowned. Development company? They've been pushing for approval on a massive gated community project. We're talking about $1 billion development that would change the entire character of your area. Luxury homes, private golf course, exclusive amenities. Eleanor's tone grew sharp. The kind of project that makes people very rich and very desperate. And you think this has something to do with what happened today? Malcolm, I think what happened today was no coincidence. If they're trying to build something that big, they need every piece of land in that area. Your property could be the key to the whole project. Across town, the fluorescent lights of the county jail cast harsh shadows on Graham Whitcomb's face as he strode through the processing area. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his silver hair immaculate despite the late hour. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. The desk sergeant looked up nervously. Mr. Whitcomb, your wife is in processing room 3. The paperwork should be ready in about an hour. Graham didn't acknowledge the man. He pushed through the door marked Authorized Personnel Only, as if he owned the building. Vanessa sat hunched over a metal table, her designer clothes wrinkled and stained. Her mascara had run, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. When Graham entered, she looked up with desperate relief. Graham, thank God you're here. This whole thing is insane. They actually arrested me. Can you believe it? Graham's expression remained cold. I can believe you failed. Vanessa blinked. Failed? Graham, I did exactly what you said. I confronted him. I tried to make him look dangerous. And where did that get us? Graham's voice was quiet, but sharp as a blade. You were supposed to create a police record against him. Instead, you gave him evidence of harassment. But you said we needed something on record. You said if we could show he was violent or unstable. I said create a situation where he would be arrested, Vanessa, not you. Graham leaned forward, his hands flat on the metal table. Do you understand what you've cost us? Vanessa shrank back. I don't understand. What's so important about some old house? Graham's jaw tightened. That man's land is the final piece we need for the Ashford Meadows project. Without his property, we can't access the main road. Without road access, we can't get county approval. Without county approval, we lose 8 years of planning and $200 million in investor commitments. Back in the dusty kitchen, Malcolm ended his call with Eleanor and sat in the growing darkness. The weight of the day pressed down on him like a physical thing. He needed answers, and the only place he might find them was in his mother's belongings. He walked to the small desk in the corner where Josephine had paid bills and written letters. The drawers stuck with age and disuse, but Malcolm worked them open one by one. Bills, recipes, old photographs of family gatherings. In the bottom drawer, his fingers found something unusual. An envelope taped to the back panel, hidden from casual view. Malcolm worked it free and held it up to the dim light filtering through the window. In his mother's careful handwriting, the envelope was labeled, If they come for the land, start here. Malcolm's fingers trembled as he tore open the envelope. The kitchen was still dark, dawn just beginning to creep through the dusty windows. He spread the contents across the scratched wooden table like pieces of a puzzle. Old county maps showed property lines in faded ink. His mother's handwriting covered the margins in careful notes. Filed March 15th. J.R. never missed payment. Tax office claims delinquent, false. Check signature on lien, 471B. Malcolm's chest tightened. Among the papers were photocopies of tax liens filed against Josephine Reddick's property. According to the documents, his mother had fallen behind on payments months before her death. The liens gave the county authority to seize the land for unpaid taxes, but Malcolm remembered helping his mother organize her finances just before he deployed. She never missed a payment, not once. He pulled out his phone and dialed Eleanor's number. "Malcolm, it's barely 6 in the morning. I need you to come to the house. Now, I found something." Eleanor arrived 40 minutes later, carrying a leather briefcase and 2 cups of coffee. Her gray hair was pulled back severely, and her sharp eyes immediately focused on the papers scattered across the table. "What am I looking at?" Malcolm pointed to the tax liens. "These say my mother owed thousands in back taxes, but here are her payment records." He showed Eleanor a stack of canceled checks and receipts. Every payment made on time, every year. Eleanor put on reading glasses and examined the documents closely. She held up one of the liens and compared it to Josephine's signature on a canceled check. "Malcolm, look at this signature." The signature on the lien was bold and flowing. Josephine's actual signature was small and precise, with a distinctive loop in the J. "That's not her handwriting," Malcolm said. "No, it's not." Eleanor's voice was deadly quiet. "Someone forged these liens. They created false tax delinquencies to justify seizing your mother's land." Malcolm felt rage building in his chest, but he forced it down. Anger wouldn't help now. "Can we prove it?" "We can try, but we need more evidence. A lot more." Across town, Graham Whitcomb paced the marble floor of his study while Vanessa nursed a cup of coffee with shaking hands. Her bail hearing had been a formality. The judge knew the Whitcomb family well. "You embarrassed us," Graham said without looking at her. "The entire county knows you were arrested for harassing some old man." "I was trying to help. You said we needed him gone." Graham stopped pacing. "I said we needed him discredited. There's a difference." He turned to face her, his expression calculating. "But maybe we can salvage this." "What do you mean?" "You're going to become the victim." Graham's tone was matter-of-fact. "That man threatened you. He made you fear for your safety in your own neighborhood. You were so terrified you called the police." Vanessa blinked. "But that's not what happened." "That's exactly what happened. And you're going to tell that story to anyone who will listen. The neighbors, the newspaper, the county commissioners." "Graham, I don't understand." "You don't need to understand." His voice cracked like a whip. "You need to do what I tell you. Make Malcolm Reddick look like a dangerous man who terrorizes innocent women." Back at the property, Malcolm spent the afternoon methodically photographing everything. His military training had taught him the importance of documentation. He captured every boundary marker, every survey pin, every road sign that established the property lines. Eleanor worked beside him, taking detailed notes about each photograph. "Your mother was smart to document all this," she said, examining a rusted survey marker. "She knew something was wrong. She always said the land would tell its own story if you knew how to listen." The sun was setting when Malcolm noticed the black SUV. It sat at the edge of the property line, engine running, tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. The vehicle hadn't been there an hour ago. Malcolm lowered his camera and stared at the SUV. It didn't move. The engine kept running like a predator waiting to pounce. The morning news played on every television in Ashford Pines. Vanessa Whitcomb sat in her pristine living room, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, as the reporter leaned forward with practiced sympathy. "I was just trying to maintain our neighborhood standards," Vanessa said, her voice trembling perfectly. "When I approached him about the property condition, he became aggressive, threatening. I feared for my safety." The camera captured every calculated tear. This man moved into our peaceful community and immediately began intimidating residents. I had no choice but to call the police. Malcolm turned off the radio in his truck as he pulled into the Ashford Pines HOA office parking lot. The interview had aired 3 times already. By now, half the county believed he was some kind of menace. The HOA office sat in a converted colonial house, its white columns and manicured lawn designed to project authority. A brass nameplate read, "Patricia Vale, Chairwoman," beside the front door. Malcolm walked inside carrying a manila folder. The receptionist, a nervous woman in her 40s, looked up with barely concealed alarm. "I need to speak with Mrs. Vale about accessing community records," Malcolm said calmly. She's very busy today. I'll wait." Patricia Vale emerged from the back office 15 minutes later. She was a tall woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her eyes swept over Malcolm like he was something unpleasant she'd found on her shoe. "Mr. Reddick," her voice was ice-cold, "I understand you've been causing quite a disturbance in our community." Malcolm pulled out his phone and set it on the desk, recording light visible. "I'm here to request access to HOA records regarding my family's property. This is a legal recording of our conversation." Patricia's expression tightened. "I'm not sure what you think you're entitled to, but this is a private community. Our residents have expressed serious concerns about safety since you arrived." "What safety concerns?" "Don't pretend you don't know. Mrs. Whitcomb was terrified by your aggressive behavior. She's lived here for 20 years without incident until you showed up." Malcolm opened his folder and pulled out a property survey. "According to county records, part of Ashford Pines is built on a road that belongs to my family. I need to see the original agreements." Patricia glanced at the survey, and something flickered across her face. Fear. "I don't know what you're talking about." "This access road." Malcolm pointed to a highlighted section. "It's listed in HOA documents as community property, but it's actually private land that was never sold or donated." "Why is that?" Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the survey. We don't have time for fishing expeditions. Our records are confidential." "Confidential from the actual property owner?" "You need to leave, now." Patricia's voice rose. "Before I call security. I haven't broken any laws by requesting public information. This conversation is over." Malcolm picked up his phone and folder. "I'll be filing a formal records request through the county. Have a good day, Mrs. Vale." Outside, 2 men in dark uniforms waited beside Malcolm's truck. Private security patches decorated their shoulders, and their tactical vests suggested they weren't here for casual conversation. "You Malcolm Reddick?" The larger guard stepped forward, blocking Malcolm's path to the driver's door. "That's right. Communities had complaints about you disturbing residents, making people uncomfortable." Malcolm kept his voice steady. "I haven't disturbed anyone. Mrs. Whitcomb says different." The second guard moved closer, crowding Malcolm against the truck. "Maybe you need to understand how things work around here." "How's that?" "Decent people don't appreciate troublemakers." The first guard placed his hand on Malcolm's chest and shoved him hard against the truck door. "Especially ones who don't know their place." Malcolm absorbed the impact, his military training keeping him balanced. The guard expected him to push back, to throw the first real punch. That's what they wanted. Evidence. Instead, Malcolm twisted sideways, slipping out of the guard's reach without striking anyone. "I'm leaving now." "Smart choice," the guard called after him. "Next time might not go so easy." Malcolm climbed into his truck and drove away without looking back. His hands stayed steady on the wheel, but anger burned in his chest like molten steel. They wanted him to lose control. To become the dangerous man Vanessa had described on television, he wouldn't give them the satisfaction. 20 minutes later, Malcolm parked outside Eleanor's law office and gathered his folder of evidence. The HOA records were definitely part of the fraud. Patricia Vale's reaction had confirmed it. Now they needed to prove exactly how deep the conspiracy went. Eleanor was waiting in her conference room when he arrived. Legal pads and case law books spread across the polished table. "The HOA records are part of it," Malcolm said without preamble. "They're hiding something about that access road." Eleanor spread Josephine's documents across the polished conference table like pieces of a massive puzzle. The manila envelope had contained more than Malcolm expected. Much more. Your mother wasn't just protecting her own property, Eleanor said, holding up a thick folder labeled County Land Records, 1995-2015. She was documenting everything. Malcolm picked up a handwritten list in his mother's careful script. 23 names, all black families, all former landowners in the county. The Williams family, Eleanor read from another document, lost 40 acres in 2003 due to alleged tax defaults, except the tax records show their payments were current. She flipped to another page. The Johnsons, 60 acres seized for code violations that were never actually filed with the county. Malcolm's jaw tightened as he scanned his mother's notes. Each case followed the same pattern. Forged documents, fake violations, pressure sales where families were told they had no choice but to sell for pennies on the dollar. 20 years, Malcolm said quietly. She spent 20 years watching this happen. Eleanor pulled out a yellowed legal document dated 1962. This is the original deed to your family's land, but look at this. She placed a more recent document beside it. Someone filed an amended deed in 1998, claiming your family only owned the house and 2 acres. The rest supposedly reverted to the county for unpaid taxes. Taxes that were never owed. Exactly. Your mother documented every forgery, every fake filing. Eleanor's voice grew harder with each revelation. The Whitcombs aren't just developers, Malcolm. They're running a systematic land theft operation. Malcolm found another folder filled with photographs, pictures of families being evicted, sheriff's deputies removing furniture from homes, bulldozers destroying houses that had stood for generations. At the bottom of the pile, Eleanor discovered a carbon copy of a legal complaint. Josephine's final signature was dated just 3 days before her death. She was going to file this, Eleanor whispered, a federal civil rights lawsuit naming Graham's father, the former county clerk, and 12 other defendants. Malcolm stared at the document. His mother's life work. Her final act of defiance. She died before she could deliver justice to the families who'd trusted her with their stories. The current development project, Eleanor continued, studying a site map. It's not just about your land. They need to destroy whatever evidence is still hidden on your property. Bank records, original documents, maybe even more testimony from victims. Malcolm's grief transformed into something sharper, more focused. His mother had carried this burden alone for decades, collecting proof while watching powerful people steal from vulnerable families. We make copies of everything, Malcolm said. Multiple sets, digital scans, cloud storage. Already started. Eleanor gestured toward her computer. But we need more than documents. We need witnesses, people willing to testify about what happened to their families. Malcolm gathered the photographs of destroyed homes and displaced families. Some of these people might still be alive, still remember. Finding them won't be easy. The Whitcombs made sure these families scattered across different states. Malcolm pulled out his phone and began photographing every document. Then we start with what we have. Make it public. Force them to respond. Eleanor smiled grimly. A public challenge? I like it. But once we go public, there's no going back. They'll throw everything they have at us. Good, Malcolm said. I'm tired of playing defense. They worked until the sun disappeared behind the mountains, scanning documents and organizing evidence into a comprehensive case file. By sunset, Malcolm had uploaded copies to 3 different cloud services and prepared a detailed summary for media release. The drive home felt different now. Malcolm wasn't just protecting his family's legacy anymore. He was fighting for every family whose land had been stolen through decades of corruption. He pulled into his driveway as darkness settled over the property. The house looked exactly as he'd left it, but something felt wrong. Malcolm grabbed his flashlight and walked the perimeter, checking windows and doors. Near the back porch, his beam caught fresh boot prints in the soft earth. Size 11 or 12. Treaded soles. Recent. Someone had been here while he was gone. The county zoning board meeting room buzzed with more activity than Malcolm had seen in years. Usually, These monthly sessions drew maybe a dozen residents complaining about neighbor disputes or permit delays. Today, nearly 50 people packed the folding chairs, and news cameras clustered near the back wall. Graham Whitcomb sat in the front row wearing his most expensive suit, a navy blue power play that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Vanessa perched beside him, her designer handbag positioned for maximum visibility. She'd clearly expected this to be another photo opportunity, another chance to play the role of beloved community leader's wife. Malcolm entered quietly through the side door with Eleanor at his side. Behind them walked the Hendersons, an elderly black couple whose family farm had been seized 15 years ago. The Patels followed, carrying a folder of documents from their grocery store that had been condemned through mysterious code violations. More families filtered in, people Malcolm had tracked down over the past week using his mother's carefully preserved contact lists. Councilman Everett Sloan called the meeting to order with his usual pompous ceremony. He wore his political smile like armor, the same expression he used for ribbon cuttings and charity galas. "First item on our agenda," Sloan announced, "is the final approval for Whitcomb Meridian's Sunrise Valley Development Project. This represents a significant investment in our community's economic future." Graham stood smoothly, his confidence filling the room like expensive cologne. "Thank you, Councilman Sloan. As you know, we've completed all environmental assessments and obtained the necessary permits. We're ready to break ground immediately following today's approval." Several board members nodded approvingly. This was supposed to be a formality, a rubber stamp on a deal that had been arranged months ago behind closed doors. Malcolm rose from his seat in the middle section. "I'd like to address the board regarding this proposal." Sloan's political mask slipped for just a moment. "Sir, public comment isn't scheduled until—" "My name is Malcolm Reddick. My family owns property that Whitcomb Meridian claims to have purchased legally." Malcolm's voice carried clearly through the room without needing amplification. "I have evidence proving that claim is false." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Graham's jaw tightened, but he maintained his businessman's composure. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that cameras were turning away from her perfectly styled appearance. Eleanor stood and handed Malcolm a thick folder. "These are copies of forged liens filed against the Reddick estate," Malcolm continued. "Documents with signatures that don't match county records. Tax claims for amounts that were never assessed." Mrs. Henderson raised a trembling hand. "They did the same thing to us." Her voice shook with decades of suppressed anger. "Said we owed back taxes we never owed. Forced us to sell our farm for nothing." Mr. Patel stood next. "Our store was condemned for violations we fixed years earlier. The inspection reports were falsified." More voices joined in, family after family sharing nearly identical stories, forged documents, fake violations, pressure sales orchestrated through fear and fraud. Sloan banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! These accusations are completely inappropriate for this forum." "Actually," Eleanor said, stepping forward with legal authority, "they're entirely appropriate." She produced an official document sealed with the county court's stamp. "This is a temporary restraining order freezing all development activity on disputed properties until ownership records can be properly reviewed." The room erupted. Graham's face went white, then flushed deep red. For the first time since Malcolm had known him, the developer looked genuinely trapped. His carefully orchestrated approval was crumbling in real time. "This is outrageous," Vanessa hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "These people are just trying to get attention." One of the news cameras swung toward her, capturing her moment of pure entitlement. The reporter looked delighted to have caught such perfect footage. The board members huddled in confused discussion. What had seemed like a routine approval was now a potential legal nightmare. Board Chairman Williams finally spoke up. "In light of these new developments, we're postponing the Whitcomb Meridian approval pending legal review." Applause erupted from the audience. Malcolm felt hands patting his back, voices thanking him for giving them hope. The families who had been silenced for years were finally being heard. Outside the courthouse steps, Malcolm stood beside Eleanor as reporters shouted questions. The afternoon sun felt warmer somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the entire town. "We won the day," Malcolm told Eleanor quietly. Across the parking lot, Graham Whitcomb sat in his black Mercedes, watching them through the windshield. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His eyes held something Malcolm had never seen there before: pure, murderous rage. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. when Malcolm turned onto Millbrook Road. Eleanor's office lights had stayed on until well past closing time as they prepared backup copies of every document. The decoy evidence bag sat on his passenger seat, filled with photocopies and blank papers designed to look convincing from a distance. The real evidence remained locked in Eleanor's office safe. They both knew tonight would bring retaliation. Malcolm's headlights cut through the darkness as he navigated the winding back road toward home. Dense woods pressed close on both sides, broken only by the skeletal framework of Graham's unfinished development. Construction equipment sat abandoned like sleeping giants in the pale moonlight. The black SUV appeared in his rearview mirror without warning. No headlights, just a dark mass moving fast on the narrow road. Malcolm's military training kicked in instantly. He pressed the accelerator, feeling his old pickup truck respond with a growl of protest. The speedometer climbed past 50 on curves designed for 30. The SUV closed the distance anyway. Metal crashed against metal as the larger vehicle slammed into his rear bumper. Malcolm's hands fought the steering wheel as his truck lurched sideways toward the drainage ditch. Gravel sprayed from his tires as he regained control. "Come on," he muttered through gritted teeth. The SUV pulled alongside him on a straight stretch. Malcolm caught a glimpse of the driver, ski mask pulled low, face invisible in the darkness. The passenger window was down. Something metallic glinted in the moonlight. Malcolm yanked his wheel hard right just as the SUV swerved toward him. His truck bounced over the shoulder and into the construction zone. Orange traffic cones scattered like bowling pins as he weaved between concrete barriers and piles of steel rebar. Behind him, the SUV followed relentlessly. Its bigger engine and all-wheel drive gave it advantages on the rough terrain. The gap closed again. Another impact sent Malcolm's truck skidding across loose gravel. His headlights swept wildly across unfinished road surfaces and construction trenches. One wrong turn would send him tumbling into a 20-foot excavation. Then he saw it. The old service path his father had used to access the back 40. It was barely wide enough for his truck, certainly too narrow for the SUV. Malcolm cut the wheel sharply left and plunged into the tree line. Branches scraped against his windows as the narrow trail swallowed his truck. In his mirrors, he watched the SUV slide past the entrance, unable to stop in time. He drove deeper into the woods until the path became impassable. Then Malcolm grabbed the decoy bag and ran. His boots crunched through dead leaves as he moved through familiar forest. Every shadow could hide an attacker, but these were his woods. He knew every deer trail and fallen log. Behind him, voices shouted in frustration. Flashlight beams swept randomly through the trees. They had found his truck, but lost their target. Malcolm crouched behind a massive oak and waited. 20 minutes passed before the voices faded. Another 10 before he heard engines starting and driving away. When silence returned, he began the long walk home. The orange glow appeared first as a distant flicker through the trees. Then the smell hit him. Smoke and burning wood carried on the night breeze. Malcolm's walk became a run as he climbed the ridge overlooking his family's property. The Reddick house was fully engulfed. Flames shot through the roof where his mother had installed new shingles just 2 years before her death. The front porch, where 3 generations had watched summer sunsets, collapsed in a shower of sparks. Windows exploded outward from the heat, scattering glass across the yard like fallen stars. Fire trucks arrived as Malcolm reached the edge of his driveway. Their sirens wailed uselessly in the night. Water arced from their hoses, but the old wooden structure was already lost. Firefighters focused on keeping the blaze from spreading to the surrounding forest. Chief Martinez approached Malcolm, his face grim in the firelight. "I'm sorry, son. We got here as fast as we could." Malcolm said nothing. He stood motionless as his childhood memories turned to ash and smoke. The kitchen where his mother had taught him to cook Sunday dinners. The living room where she had read him stories about justice, always winning in the end. The study where she had secretly documented decades of corruption. All of it reduced to glowing embers. By dawn, the news vans had arrived. Local reporters interviewed neighbors who claimed they had seen Malcolm's truck speeding away from the property around midnight. Anonymous sources suggested financial troubles and insurance fraud. Graham Whitcomb appeared live on the morning show, his face arranged in carefully practiced concern. "It's tragic when people resort to desperate measures. I hope Mr. Reddick gets the help he clearly needs." Malcolm stood before the smoking ruins as police cars pulled into his driveway. Blood from tree branches had dried on his face and hands. His clothes were torn and dirty from his escape through the woods. He remained silent as the officers approached, their expressions already suspicious. The decoy bag was gone, exactly as planned. But his mother's house, the repository of 80 years of family history, had been reduced to a foundation filled with ash. Detective Morris stepped forward with handcuffs ready. "Malcolm Reddick, you're under arrest for arson and insurance fraud." Officer Harper separated Malcolm from the other investigators, leading him to a spot beside the fire trucks, where the morning light filtered through the smoke. His expression was cautious but not hostile, a marked difference from Detective Morris, who continued barking orders at the crime scene team. "Tell me what happened last night," Harper said, pulling out his notebook. "And I mean everything." Malcolm studied the officer's face. No predatory gleam, no smirk waiting for the right moment to pounce. Just a tired man trying to understand what he was looking at. "They chased me," Malcolm said simply. "2 vehicles, tried to run me off County Road 47 near the construction site." "Who's they?" "I don't know their names, but I know who sent them." Harper wrote steadily. "Why were you out there?" "Because Graham Whitcomb's people have been watching my house for days. I figured if I drove away with something valuable, they'd follow." Malcolm gestured toward the smoking ruins. "Looks like the rest of his crew stayed behind to finish the job." "What were you carrying?" "Decoy documents, copies of old grocery receipts and phone bills. Nothing important." Harper's pen stopped moving. "Decoy? I expected this." Malcolm's voice remained level despite the destruction around them. "My mother spent 30 years documenting corruption in this county. You don't collect that kind of evidence without making enemies. I knew they'd come for it eventually." "So, where are the real documents?" "Safe, in multiple locations." A black sedan pulled into the driveway, cutting through the cluster of emergency vehicles. Eleanor Briggs stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of someone ready for war. She marched directly to Harper, ignoring the other officers completely. "I'm Eleanor Briggs, Mr. Reddick's attorney. Before anyone makes accusations about insurance fraud or arson, I demand qualified arson investigators inspect this site." Detective Morris approached from the ruins, scowling. "Ma'am, this is a crime scene." "Exactly, which means it should be investigated properly." Eleanor's voice cut through his protest like a blade. "Not contaminated by officers who've already decided what they want to find." She opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder. "These are copies of documents my client preserved in my office safe. Evidence of systematic fraud involving county officials, judges, and developers, including threats made against the Reddick family." Harper took the folder, his expression growing more serious as he scanned the first few pages. Financial records showing suspicious land transfers, correspondence between Graham Whitcomb and county assessors, affidavits from families who had lost their property under questionable circumstances. "There's more," Eleanor said. "Much more." Malcolm walked toward the foundation, stepping carefully around the debris. The old stone basement walls had partially survived the fire, but the intense heat had caused several sections to crack and shift. In the northeast corner, A gap had opened where two foundation stones had separated. He knelt beside the opening, peering into the darkness behind the stones. His fingers found the edge of something metallic. "Harper," he called quietly. The officer approached, Eleanor close behind. Malcolm reached into the gap and pulled out a metal document box, its surface blackened by age but otherwise intact. Then another, and another. 5 boxes in total, each one sealed with wax and wrapped in oiled cloth. "My mother was thorough," Malcolm said, breaking the wax seal on the first container. Inside were manila folders organized by year, going back decades. Property deeds with forged signatures. Church affidavits testifying to fraudulent sales. Photographs of meetings between county officials and Whitcomb representatives. Eleanor opened the second box and whistled softly. Letters between judges and assessors, discussing how to handle resistant property owners. Harper picked up a document from the third box. It was a detailed map showing every property seized through tax auctions over a 20-year period. Red lines connected each seizure to specific county employees and their family members, creating a web of corruption that stretched across the entire region. The officer studied the map for several minutes, comparing it to other documents. His face grew pale as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. He looked up at Malcolm, then at Eleanor. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "This is no longer a local case." The temporary command office smelled like burnt coffee and cheap disinfectant. Sheriff Bell had driven down from the federal building in less than 3 hours, bringing with her a team of financial crimes specialists and enough paperwork to bury a small courthouse. She spread the recovered documents across 2 folding tables, organizing them by date and type of fraud. Malcolm sat across from her, methodically explaining the pattern his mother had uncovered over 30 years of careful documentation. "Graham doesn't just steal land," Malcolm said, pointing to a series of property transfers from 2019. "He destroys people first, makes them desperate, makes the community turn against them." Eleanor opened one of the manila folders, revealing a stack of newspaper clippings. Headlines screamed accusations of tax evasion, drug dealing, and domestic violence, all targeting families who had later lost their property through questionable legal proceedings. "Look at the dates," she said, spreading the articles across the table. "Every smear campaign starts exactly 6 months before the tax auction. Every single one." Harper leaned over her shoulder, studying the pattern. "The Hendersons, the Martinez family, the Johnsons." His voice grew quieter with each name. "I remember these cases. Thought it was just bad luck hitting good people." "Not luck," Malcolm said. "Strategy. Graham plants evidence, spreads rumors, bribes witnesses to file false complaints. By the time the family realizes what's happening, their reputation is destroyed, and their legal bills have bankrupted them." Sheriff Bell picked up a financial ledger, running her finger down columns of payments made to various county employees. "The money trail crosses 3 counties and involves federal tax fraud. We're looking at racketeering charges under RICO." She pulled out a digital recorder and set it on the table. "Tell me about the construction site. Why is Graham rushing the development?" Malcolm walked to the window, looking out at the courthouse where his family had lost their first legal battle decades ago. "Because he knows time is running out. My mother documented everything, but she never had enough evidence to prove the conspiracy in federal court. Graham's been waiting for her to die so he could grab our land and bury the proof." "But the proof didn't burn," Eleanor said. "Graham doesn't know that yet." Malcolm turned back to the group, his expression thoughtful. "He thinks the fire destroyed everything. Right now, he believes he's won." Harper frowned. "So, what's the plan? Arrest him?" "Not yet," Marcia said. "We need him to expose the network. If we grab Graham now, the other players will disappear. Judges will retire early. County employees will transfer to different departments. Evidence will vanish from filing cabinets." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Graham's arrogant. Always has been. If he thinks victory is certain, he'll get sloppy. Start celebrating before the job is finished. Eleanor's face darkened. That sounds extremely dangerous, Malcolm. These people already tried to kill you once. They tried to scare me. There's a difference. Malcolm pulled out his phone, showing them a text message that had arrived an hour earlier. Look at this. The message was from an unknown number. Heard about the fire. Sorry for your loss. Time to move on. Call if you want to discuss selling the remaining acreage. Graham? Harper asked. Has to be. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. Malcolm set the phone on the table. He thinks I'm broken. Thinks losing the house and the documents means I'll give up and take whatever offer he makes. Marcia opened her briefcase and removed several small electronic devices. A digital recorder no bigger than a matchbook. A body camera disguised as a shirt button. A GPS tracker that looked like a car key. If you're serious about this, we'll wire you completely. Video, audio, and location tracking. The moment you feel unsafe, you say the code word, and we move in. Eleanor grabbed Malcolm's arm. This is insane. Graham's desperate now. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Graham's not cornered yet, Malcolm said gently. He thinks he's hunting. But when predators think they're about to feed, they make mistakes. They expose themselves. Harper's radio crackled with static. He stepped away to answer it, speaking quietly with dispatch. When he returned, his expression was grim. Graham's people filed permits this morning for a private groundbreaking ceremony, tomorrow at 9 a.m., right on the disputed construction site. Malcolm smiled for the first time since the fire. Perfect. He's so confident he's throwing a party on stolen land. That's not confidence, Eleanor said. That's a trap. Maybe, but it's also an opportunity. Malcolm picked up the body camera, examining its tiny lens. Graham wants to humiliate me publicly. Show the whole county that the Reddick family is finished. He'll invite county officials, local business owners, maybe even some of the families he's destroyed. Marcia activated the recording equipment, testing each device methodically. You understand what you're walking into? Graham will have security, probably armed. And if he suspects you're recording, he won't suspect anything, because as far as Graham Whitcomb knows, Malcolm Reddick is a defeated man with nothing left to lose. Malcolm clipped the GPS tracker to his keyring. Sometimes the best way to catch someone is to let them think they've already caught you. Harper checked his service weapon, making sure the holster was secure. We'll have unmarked units positioned around the site. Federal agents in surveillance vehicles. If anything goes wrong... It won't go wrong, Malcolm interrupted, because Graham's going to confess everything. On camera, in front of witnesses. Eleanor shook her head, but she was already opening her law files, preparing for whatever evidence Malcolm might collect. You're either very brave or completely insane. Malcolm picked up the digital recorder, testing its weight in his palm. Maybe both. But tomorrow morning, Graham Whitcomb is going to tell me exactly how he destroyed my family. And this time, the whole world is going to hear him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site as Graham Whitcomb adjusted his silk tie and stepped up to the temporary podium. White folding chairs were arranged in neat rows across the cleared dirt, filled with investors in expensive suits, county officials clutching coffee cups, and homeowners association leaders whispering among themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, Graham began, his voice carrying easily across the gathering through the wireless microphone clipped to his lapel. Today marks a historic moment for our community. Despite malicious rumors and desperate attempts to derail progress, Whitcomb Meridian Development will move forward with the Ashford Pines Luxury Resort Complex. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Behind Graham, a large banner displayed architectural renderings of gleaming hotel towers, golf courses, and swimming pools. The construction equipment stood ready. Bulldozers, excavators, and cement trucks lined up like an army prepared for battle. Vanessa Whitcomb sat in the front row, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She wore a cream-colored dress suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Patricia Vale occupied the chair beside her, clipboard balanced on her knees, taking notes with the focused intensity of someone documenting history. Councilman Everett Sloan shifted uncomfortably in his metal folding chair, mopping sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. The morning was cool, but his nervous perspiration had nothing to do with temperature. Some individuals have attempted to spread false claims about this development, Graham continued, his tone growing harder. Desperate people making desperate accusations. But property records don't lie. Legal documents don't change because someone wishes they did. A murmur of agreement passed through the investors. Several HOA board members nodded approvingly. Patricia Vale made another note on her clipboard. That's when Malcolm appeared at the edge of the construction site. He walked slowly down the center aisle between the folding chairs, his footsteps deliberate and measured. The bruises on his face from the house fire were still visible, purple shadows under his left eye, a healing cut across his cheek. His clothes were clean but simple. Dark jeans, a plain white shirt, and work boots that had seen better days. Conversations died as Malcolm passed. Heads turned. Several investors exchanged uncomfortable glances. The easy confidence of the ceremony began to crack. Graham's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. Well, Mr. Malcolm Reddick has decided to join us after all. Malcolm stopped about 10 feet from the podium, his hands relaxed at his sides. He said nothing, just stood there with the patience of someone who had learned to wait for exactly the right moment. I suppose you're here to make another scene, Graham said, his voice carrying a mocking edge that drew nervous laughter from some of the crowd. More wild stories about property theft and conspiracy theories? Still, Malcolm remained silent. Graham's confidence grew with each passing second of silence. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Reddick's family lost this land fair and square. Legal judgments, unpaid taxes, poor financial decisions spanning decades. He gestured toward Malcolm with theatrical pity. Burned houses don't create ownership, I'm afraid. That's when Malcolm finally spoke, his voice calm and clear enough to carry across the entire gathering without amplification. Graham, why do your loan documents with First National Bank list Reddick family land as projected collateral for this development? The question hit the crowd like a physical blow. Several investors straightened in their chairs. The county officials stopped their quiet conversations. Even the construction workers operating nearby equipment seemed to pause. Vanessa's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. She recognized the tone in Malcolm's voice, the same deadly calm she'd heard when he'd confronted her about the false police report, the same quiet certainty that meant he knew everything. Graham's smile twitched, but he maintained his composure. I have no idea what you're talking about. The documents are dated 18 months ago, Malcolm continued, pulling a folded paper from his shirt pocket. Before any legal proceedings against my family were finalized, before the tax liens were filed, before the fire department citations were issued. The investors were no longer whispering among themselves. They were staring at Graham with the focused attention of people who suddenly realized their money might be in jeopardy. Councilman Sloan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the dirt. I think we should— Sit down, Everett, Graham snapped, his polished facade beginning to crack. Then he caught himself, forcing the smile back. Mr. Reddick is obviously confused. Grief does terrible things to a person's judgment. But Malcolm wasn't finished. The loan application specifically mentions acquisition of parcels currently under Reddick family ownership. That's fraud, Graham. Federal fraud. Vanessa shot to her feet, her voice shrill with panic. He's lying. He's desperate, and he's lying. But the damage was spreading through the crowd like a virus. Investors were pulling out phones, probably calling their lawyers. County officials were edging toward their vehicles. The carefully orchestrated celebration was collapsing in real time. Graham made a sharp gesture to two large men in dark suits standing near the construction equipment. Private security, Malcolm realized. The kind of men who solved problems with their hands instead of their words. They moved quickly, crossing the dirt toward Malcolm with the confident stride of people accustomed to making problems disappear. The crowd began to scatter, some people heading for their cars, others pulling out phones to record what was about to happen. "Mr. Reddick needs to leave," Graham announced, his voice no longer carrying any pretense of civility. "This is private property, and he's trespassing." The security guards reached Malcolm, flanking him on either side. One was thick through the shoulders with scarred knuckles. The other was taller, leaner, but moved with the fluid grace of someone trained in violence. "Come on, old man," the thick-shouldered guard said, reaching for Malcolm's arm. "Time to go?" Malcolm didn't move, didn't step back or raise his hands defensively. He just stood there, meeting the guard's eyes with steady calm. "I'm not trespassing on my own land." That's when the first guard's patience ran out. His fist connected with Malcolm's ribs, a brutal shot designed to fold him in half and end the confrontation quickly. Malcolm stumbled but didn't fall. The crowd erupted into chaos, screaming, shouting, chairs overturning as people scrambled for safety. But through it all, phones kept recording, cameras kept rolling, and Malcolm stayed on his feet. The second guard moved faster than Malcolm expected, driving his knee up toward Malcolm's ribs while his partner recovered from the failed grab. Malcolm twisted, taking the blow on his hip instead of his stomach, but the impact still sent pain shooting down his leg. The thick-shouldered guard swung again, this time connecting with Malcolm's jaw. Blood sprayed from his split lip as his head snapped to the side. The metallic taste filled his mouth, but he kept his footing, kept his hands up, kept his mind clear. "Stay down, old man," the taller guard snarled, pulling a collapsible baton from his belt. The weapon extended with a sharp click that cut through the screaming crowd. Malcolm wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes never leaving his attackers. The military training kicked in, not the desperate flailing of a street fight, but the calculated patience of someone who understood leverage and timing. The guard with the baton swung hard at Malcolm's shoulder. Malcolm stepped into the attack instead of away from it, letting the weapon glance off his shoulder blade while driving his elbow into the guard's solar plexus. The man folded forward, gasping, and Malcolm grabbed the baton as it fell from nerveless fingers. The thick-shouldered guard rushed him from behind, wrapping thick arms around Malcolm's chest in a crushing bear hug. Malcolm felt ribs compress, felt his breathing constrict, but instead of struggling against the hold, he dropped his weight suddenly and drove his heel down hard on the guard's instep. The grip loosened just enough. Malcolm twisted, using the guard's own momentum to send him stumbling backward into one of the orange construction barricades. The plastic barrier cracked under the impact, and the guard went down hard, his head bouncing off the dirt. The taller guard had recovered enough to charge again, this time going low, trying to tackle Malcolm around the waist. Malcolm sidestepped, using the man's momentum against him, and brought the confiscated baton down across his shoulders. Not hard enough to cause permanent damage, but enough to drop him face first into the dirt. Malcolm stepped back, breathing hard, blood still trickling from his split lip. His shoulder throbbed where the baton had connected, and his ribs ached from the knee strike, but he remained standing while both guards stayed down. The crowd had scattered to the edges of the construction site, most people recording with their phones from behind vehicles and equipment. Graham stood frozen beside the podium, his face twisted with rage and something that looked like genuine fear. "You rotten coward," Graham snarled, abandoning any pretense of civility. "You think you've won something here? You think this changes anything?" That's when the sirens cut through the air. Multiple vehicles roared onto the construction site, patrol cars, unmarked sedans, and a black SUV with federal plates. Doors slammed as uniformed officers and plainclothes agents spread out across the area with the practiced efficiency of a coordinated operation. Officer Harper emerged from the lead patrol car, his weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. "Nobody move! Police!" Behind him came Officer Alvarez, and behind him, Sheriff Bell herself, her face grim with purpose. The federal agents fanned out, blocking every exit from the construction site. Graham's eyes darted frantically across the scene, calculating distances to the parking area. "This is a mistake," he shouted, but his voice cracked with panic. "I'm a respected businessman. I have rights." "Graham Whitcomb," Sheriff Bell called out, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and assault." Graham bolted. He shoved through the scattered crowd, knocking over an elderly investor and sending Patricia Vale sprawling into the dirt. His expensive shoes slipped on the loose gravel as he sprinted toward the parking area where dozens of vehicles sat in neat rows. But the federal agents were faster and younger. They closed the distance quickly, tackling Graham just as he reached his silver Mercedes. He went down hard, his perfect hair mussed, his suit jacket tearing as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "This is harassment," Graham screamed as they hauled him upright. "I'll have your badges, all of you." Meanwhile, Vanessa had reached her white SUV and was fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the door open. When the engine finally roared to life, she floored the accelerator, sending gravel spraying as she tore away from the construction site. The SUV bounced violently over the unfinished road, bottoming out in potholes and scraping against exposed rocks. Vanessa's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as she pushed the vehicle faster than the rough terrain could handle. She could see the boundary of the construction site ahead, the place where Whitcomb Meridian Development's authority ended and Malcolm's property began. All she had to do was reach the main road, get to her lawyer, get to her connections, get somewhere safe. But as the SUV crested the final hill, Vanessa's heart stopped. The access gate stood closed and locked, exactly as Malcolm had left it. The heavy chain and industrial padlock gleamed in the afternoon sun like a steel trap waiting to spring. Vanessa slammed on the brakes, but momentum carried the SUV forward until it crashed into the gate with a grinding shriek of metal. Steam rose from the crumpled hood as the engine died. Officer Alvarez reached the wreckage first, his weapon drawn. "Step out of the vehicle, hands where I can see them." Vanessa stumbled out, her designer dress torn, her perfect hair hanging in her face. "You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am?" The handcuffs clicked around her wrists with the same finality that had claimed her husband. Behind them, back at the podium, Graham was being loaded into a federal transport vehicle, his screams of outrage echoing across the construction site that would never be completed. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the construction site as federal agents carried box after box of evidence to their waiting vehicles. News vans lined the perimeter, their satellite dishes extended like mechanical flowers reaching for the sky. Reporters pushed against the police tape, shouting questions while cameras rolled. "Sheriff Bell, can you confirm the charges against Graham Whitcomb? Is it true the fraud scheme spans multiple counties? How many families were affected by the illegal land seizures?" Sheriff Bell stood at a makeshift podium, her federal badge glinting in the sunlight. Behind her, agents continued loading documents, hard drives, and file boxes, the paper trail of corruption that had taken decades to build and one afternoon to dismantle. "Graham Whitcomb has been charged with multiple felonies," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "These include conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering under federal RICO statutes. We're also pursuing charges related to arson, intimidation, and witness tampering." The crowd stirred. Several displaced families had gathered at the edges, their faces showing the first hope they'd felt in years. "What about his wife?" called a reporter from Channel 7. "Vanessa Whitcomb faces charges for conspiracy, filing false police reports, and fleeing arrest. Her bail has been denied pending trial." More boxes emerged from the construction trailer. Agent Morrison carried a heavy filing cabinet toward the vehicles, his face grim with purpose. Every document represented another family destroyed, another life disrupted by Graham's greed. "Sheriff Bell," another reporter pressed, "we understand county officials were also involved?" Patricia Vale, president of the Ashford Pines Homeowners Association, and County Councilman Everett Sloan have been taken in for questioning. Their signatures appear on numerous fraudulent access documents and zoning approvals. We expect additional charges to follow. Malcolm stood near the locked gate, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. His split lip had stopped bleeding, and the ache in his ribs was manageable. But the real healing would take much longer. Justice, he'd learned, was not a destination, but a process. Sheriff Bell approached him, her expression respectful. "Mr. Reddick, I owe you an apology. The way you were treated in my county was unacceptable." "The system worked eventually," Malcolm replied, though his tone carried no forgiveness for the weeks of harassment he'd endured. "There's something else," she continued. "We've opened a full review of every land seizure case in the county going back 20 years. Your mother's documentation is helping us identify dozens of families who were defrauded." The weight of those words settled over Malcolm like a benediction. Josephine Reddick's life's work would finally see justice served. As if summoned by the mention of his mother's name, Malcolm pulled out a folded paper, a statement he'd prepared for this moment. The reporters noticed and surged forward, microphones extended like weapons. "My mother, Josephine Reddick, spent her life fighting for families who couldn't fight for themselves," Malcolm began, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. "She was called a troublemaker, a liar, someone who stood in the way of progress. But she knew the truth that we've proven today, that corruption disguised as development is still corruption." Camera flashes popped like tiny lightning strikes. Someone in the crowd called out support. "Josephine Reddick's name has been cleared," Malcolm continued. "But more importantly, the families she tried to help will finally receive justice. That's her real memorial." Sheriff Bell stepped forward again. "We're establishing a victim restitution fund using assets seized from Whitcomb Meridian Development. Every family affected by these fraudulent land seizures will be compensated." The crowd erupted in cheers. Malcolm saw tears on the faces of people who'd been fighting hopeless battles for years, people who'd thought the system would never work for them. Weeks passed like pages turning in a book of restoration. The construction equipment disappeared first, hauled away by court order. The orange barriers and warning signs followed. The scarred earth began to heal as autumn rain washed away the dust of Graham's ambitions. Malcolm won the civil judgment easily, $3.7 million plus attorney fees. The development was officially canceled. The land returned to its rightful boundaries. Control of the access road reverted to the Reddick family, as it should have remained all along. But the biggest victory came when Malcolm announced the creation of the Reddick Justice Center, funded by the civil settlement. It would provide free legal services to families facing property disputes, ensuring that what happened to his mother would never happen to anyone else. Now, Malcolm stood before the restored gate, watching as workers positioned the new sign. The old fence had been repaired, the lock mechanism upgraded, but the message remained the same, a declaration of ownership that had stood for over a century. The workers stepped back as the sign settled into place. Private property, Reddick family land, since 1908. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.